Nina dropped from above, landing directly on a drone and driving her combat knife through its central processor. Alex's covering fire destroyed drones trying to reposition. Ryan and his team moved through the enemy formation like a storm, their weapons never stopping. In 30 seconds, the ambush point was clear. In 35 seconds, they were moving forward again. Aboard the Eternal Horizon, Admiral Shendar watched the battle with amazement and horror. The Spectres were succeeding, but the cost was mounting. Team vitals showed injuries accumulating. Several operators had been killed by lucky shots or overwhelming fire. But the advance continued. Every team that lost a member absorbed the survivors and kept pushing forward. There was no retreat, no hesitation, just relentless forward momentum. The Vrix command intelligence finally understood what it was facing. These weren't normal soldiers who could be stopped by calculation and superior firepower. These were beings who thrived on adversity, who became more dangerous when wounded, who fought harder when the odds were against them. The machine intelligence did something it had never done before. It felt something approximating fear. Ryan's team reached the central core, a vast chamber where the Vrix command intelligence resided. It was a sphere of processing power suspended in the center of the room, protected by energy shields and surrounded by the most advanced combat drones the collective had produced. This was the final test. This was where the war would be decided. All teams, this is Cole, Ryan broadcast. We're at the core. Beginning final assault. Price, how's that power grid looking? Charges are set, Karen responded from her position. Say the word and this station goes dark. Do it. The explosions rippled through the station's power systems. Main power failed. Emergency lights flickered on. The Vrix drones hesitated for a fraction of a second as they switched to backup systems. That fraction of a second was all the Spectres needed. 20 teams converged on the core chamber from every direction. The Vrix threw everything at them, but the distress signal came through at Oro 300 hours, cutting through the quiet of the night shift like a blade. Captain Jake Morrison sat up in his chair aboard the Earth defense ship Valiant, listening to the desperate voice crackling through the communication system. It was a Zenthari passenger liner, 300 souls aboard under attack by unknown raiders. The voice pleaded for help, for anyone to respond, for someone to save them. Then the signal died. Jake knew what would happen next. The Galactic Council would receive the same transmission. They would file reports, open an investigation, and schedule a committee meeting. By the time their peacekeepers arrived at the coordinates, they would find only wreckage floating in the void. Just like the last time, and the time before that. Lieutenant Sophie Grant sat in yet another council session 3 days later, watching the alien diplomats discuss the attack with their usual detached concern. The Zenthari representative showed images of the debris field where the passenger liner had been. 300 people gone, families, children, elderly travelers heading home after visiting relatives on distant worlds, all dead. The council members expressed their sympathy. They spoke about the tragedy. They promised a thorough investigation. Sophie wanted to scream. This was the 47th attack in 18 months. 47 ships lost. 47 distress calls that ended in silence. And every single time the council's response was the same. Sympathy, investigation, and ultimately nothing. Sophie had tried to understand their perspective. The council species came from gentle worlds. Their planets had mild weather, comfortable gravity, and evolution that favored cooperation over competition. They genuinely could not comprehend systematic predation. When they looked at the pattern of attacks, they saw unfortunate incidents. Random violence. Bad luck. Humans saw something different. Humans came from Earth, a death world where everything tried to kill you. High gravity, extreme weather, competing predators at every level of the food chain. Humanity evolved by becoming the apex predator, by learning to hunt, to fight, to kill, or be killed. When humans looked at 47 attacks, they saw a pattern. They saw a hunting ground. They saw prey being selected. Commander Tyler Hayes sat in his office at Earth Naval Intelligence, surrounded by data screens showing every attack. He had been tracking these incidents since the first one, quietly gathering information that the Council either ignored or failed to see. The pattern was clear to anyone willing to look. Every single attacked vessel belonged to what the Council classified as non-aggressive species. Traders who carried no weapons, passenger ships with minimal security, science vessels focused on research, not defense. The raiders had learned a simple lesson. Some species in the galaxy would not fight back with meaningful force. Tyler highlighted another commonality on his screen. The attacks all happened in a specific region of space, between major trade routes where response times were measured in days instead of hours. The raiders were smart. They picked targets who could not defend themselves and locations where help would arrive too late. He compiled his findings into a report and sent it to Admiral Kate Sullivan at Fleet Headquarters. The message was simple. The Council's civilized approach was getting people killed. Someone needed to do something. Someone needed to be willing to fight. Admiral Sullivan read the report in her office overlooking the sprawling Earth naval base. She was a veteran of humanity's expansion into space, back when Earth's various nations still competed violently for resources and territory. She had seen what happened when predators sensed weakness. They attacked. They kept attacking until someone made them stop. She called a meeting of Earth's military leadership. Around the conference table sat officers who had grown increasingly frustrated, watching the Council's inaction. They understood what the alien species could not. Civilization was not maintained by good intentions and diplomatic protests. It was maintained by the willingness to use force against those who threatened the innocent. Jake Morrison attended that meeting via video link from the Valiant. He spoke plainly. Earth had joined the galactic community, hoping to be accepted as equals among the stars. Instead, they were treated as violent primitives, barely tolerated deathworlders who did not understand civilized conduct. Meanwhile, civilized species were dying because no one would protect them. The discussion went on for hours, but the conclusion was inevitable. Humanity would no longer wait for Council authorization to respond to distress calls. They would no longer file diplomatic protests while bodies floated in space. Earth's fleet would take action, and they would deal with the political consequences later. Sophie Grant received encrypted orders recalling her from the Council for a special assignment. As she packed her things, a Council member stopped her in the corridor. The alien, a peaceful Threxian diplomat, thanked her for humanity's patience with the Council's processes. He assured her that progress was being made, that the next committee meeting would surely produce results. Sophie smiled politely and said nothing. She knew the truth. The next committee meeting would produce nothing but more words. More sympathy, more promises, and more people would die while the Council debated. Tyler Hayes worked through the night coordinating with human intelligence assets across the sector. If Earth was going to act, they needed to be smart about it. They needed to catch the raiders, capture them alive if possible, and gather evidence. The galaxy needed to see proof that humanity was not the violent aggressors, that there were real predators operating in the shadows. Admiral Sullivan issued quiet orders to ships across the human fleet. Captains were told to prepare for rapid deployment. Engineers checked weapon systems and engines. Marines drilled in boarding procedures. Earth was getting ready for war, even if they had not officially declared it yet. Then the 48th distress call arrived. A colony ship called Bright Horizon, carrying Threxian families toward a new settlement world. The transmission was panicked, desperate. They were under attack. Engines failing. Hull breaches on multiple decks. Children screaming in the background. Please, someone help us. Jake Morrison did not wait for orders. He did not file a request with the Council. He did not check whether the Valiant had authorization to leave its patrol sector. He simply plotted an intercept course and gave the order to engage maximum thrust. His crew responded without hesitation. They knew what needed to be done. Across human space, other captains received the same distress call. They made the same decision. The Earth Defense Fleet began to move, converging on the coordinates where the Bright Horizon was dying. No formal orders needed. No diplomatic clearance required. Just human beings responding to a cry for help the only way they knew how, with overwhelming force and absolute commitment. The galaxy was about to learn what it meant to make humanity angry, what it meant to prey on the innocent one time too many, what it meant when deathworlders decided that enough was enough. The Valiant arrived too late. Jake Morrison stood on his bridge, watching the debris field that had once been the Bright Horizon drift past his view screen. Pieces of hull plating, personal belongings, things that had belonged to families who would never reach their new home. 342 people. Dead. Children, parents, elderly couples starting fresh on a frontier world. All gone. Commander Lisa Price ran her scans over the wreckage, her tactical officer training automatically cataloging the evidence. Energy weapon burns on the hull fragments. The pattern of destruction suggested at least 3 attacking vessels. They had disabled the engines first, then systematically torn the colony ship apart. Professional work. Practiced. This was not random violence. This was hunting. Jake made a decision that would change everything. Instead of returning to port, instead of filing another useless report, he ordered the Valiant to hold position. He sent encrypted communications to other Earth ships in the sector. Within hours, a small task force assembled in the debris field. 5 human warships, their crews angry and ready for action. Lieutenant Danny Ford commanded the destroyer Hammer, one of the ships that answered Jake's call. He was young but experienced, a veteran of Earth's corporate wars before humanity united for space exploration. Danny understood what the others were thinking without needing to say it. They were done being reactive. It was time to set a trap. Commander Ryan Clark brought his ship, the cruiser Steadfast, loaded with Marines and boarding equipment. Ryan had spent years fighting pirates in the Sol system back when Earth's expansion was wild and lawless. He knew how predators thought. They had a hunting ground, a territory they considered safe. They would come back. Predators always returned to successful hunting grounds. The plan came together quickly. They needed bait, something to draw the raiders out, but it could not be an actual civilian ship full of innocent people. Lisa suggested using one of Earth's merchant vessels. Unlike the lightly built traders of other species, human cargo ships were constructed with reinforced hulls and weapon hardpoints. Earth's history of piracy meant even civilian ships expected to defend themselves. The freighter Iron Duke volunteered. Captain Amy Ross was a civilian merchant, but she had served in Earth's Navy before retiring to commercial shipping. She understood the risks. Her ship would broadcast on common trade frequencies, following standard routes through the raiders' hunting ground. But her cargo holds would be empty, except for Ryan's Marines in full combat armor. Amy took the Iron Duke out alone, transmitting routine shipping messages, behaving exactly like the vulnerable prey the raiders had been attacking. The human warships followed at a distance, maintaining communication silence and running with minimal power signatures. They positioned themselves at the edge of sensor range, close enough to respond quickly, but far enough to avoid detection. Days passed. The Iron Duke made slow progress through the sector, broadcasting her position like any normal merchant vessel. Amy kept her crew to minimal numbers on the bridge, making the ship appear as helpless as possible. In the cargo holds, Marines waited in the darkness, weapons ready, breathing recycled air through their armor systems. Lisa Price monitored the passive sensors from the Valiant, watching for any sign of movement. The waiting was the hardest part. Every hour that passed meant the raiders might have moved on, might have changed their pattern, might have somehow learned about the trap. But Jake trusted his instincts. Predators were predictable. They would come. On the 4th day, the sensors detected movement. 3 vessels emerged from the shadow of a dead moon, their energy signatures matching the weapon traces found at multiple attack sites. Lisa confirmed the identification within seconds. These were the raiders. The same ships, the same tactics coming to claim another victim. The raiders moved with practiced efficiency. They approached the Iron Duke from 3 angles, cutting off escape routes. Their first shot was an electromagnetic pulse designed to disable engines without destroying the cargo. They had done this before many times. Take the ship intact, strip anything valuable, eliminate the crew. Simple, efficient, profitable. Amy Ross broadcast a panicked distress call, exactly like the 47 previous victims. She reported engine failure, life support compromised, requesting immediate assistance. The raiders ignored the transmission. No one ever came to help in this sector. The council was days away. The distress calls always ended the same way. The raiders began their approach, preparing to dock and board. Their crews would be ready with weapons, expecting terrified civilians who would surrender immediately. They had learned that most galactic species would not fight. They would beg, plead, negotiate, but they would not resist with violence. Jake Morrison gave the order. The human task force dropped their stealth protocols and engaged engines at maximum thrust. The acceleration would have killed most galactic Species, the gravity forces crushing organs not evolved to handle such stress, but humans came from a high-gravity world. Their bodies were built for this. The warships accelerated like missiles, crossing the distance in minutes instead of hours. The raiders realized their mistake immediately. Their sensors showed 5 military-grade warships bearing down on them at impossible speeds. They attempted to scatter, to break contact and flee. But they had positioned themselves around the Iron Duke, trapping themselves in the same net they had cast for their prey. Danny Ford's hammer fired first. Railgun rounds, solid projectiles, accelerated to a fraction of light speed, punched through the first raiders' shields like paper. The raiders used energy shields designed to deflect lasers and particle beams. They were not prepared for kinetic weapons, for the ancient technology of throwing rocks very, very fast. The raider ship's hull ruptured, atmosphere venting into space. The second raider turned to fight, bringing its own weapons to bear. Energy beams lanced out toward Ryan Clark's Steadfast, hitting the shields at full strength. But human shields were designed differently, built to handle both energy and kinetic impacts. The Steadfast point defense systems came online, tracking and destroying incoming missiles with accuracy that seemed impossible to the raiders. The accuracy was not impossible. It was evolution. Humans had survived on Earth by developing incredible hand-eye coordination, by learning to throw spears and rocks at moving targets, by tracking fast-moving threats through dense terrain. Those same instincts translated through combat computers and targeting systems made human gunners terrifyingly effective. The third raider captain saw his companions dying and made a choice. He broadcast surrender on all frequencies, cutting his engines and powering down weapons. Jake Morrison accepted, though every instinct wanted to finish what the raiders had started. But they needed prisoners. They needed information. They needed proof of what was happening in this sector. Ryan Clark's Marines boarded the surrendered raider vessel within minutes. The raiders offered no resistance, their crew shocked at how quickly their ambush had become a trap. The Marines secured the ship, detained the crew, and began documenting everything they found. What they discovered would shake the foundations of galactic society. The raider ship's computers contained logs of dozens of attacks, personal effects from hundreds of victims, financial records showing payments from multiple sources, communication transcripts with buyers for stolen cargo, and most damning, encrypted messages from species who were members of the Galactic Council, coordinating targets and timing attacks. Jake Morrison stood in the raider captain's quarters, looking at evidence of a conspiracy that went far beyond simple piracy. This was not random violence. This was coordinated, funded, and protected. The Council's inaction was not incompetence. For some members, it was policy. They were using raiders as proxies to wage economic warfare against their rivals while maintaining the fiction of civilized peace. Lisa Price began compiling the evidence, knowing they had just uncovered something far larger than anyone anticipated. Danny Ford coordinated with the other ships, securing the area and making sure no other raiders were nearby. Ryan Clark supervised the transfer of prisoners to the Valiant's brig. Amy Ross brought the Iron Duke alongside, her crew emerging from their hiding places to help with salvage operations. She looked at the captured raider vessels and felt satisfaction. They had come hunting for prey and found predators instead. The galaxy's other species might not understand that lesson, but humanity did. Jake sent an encrypted transmission to Admiral Sullivan. The message was simple, but its implications were enormous. They had evidence of a conspiracy. They had prisoners who could testify. They had proof that the Galactic Council was not the beacon of civilization it claimed to be. And most importantly, they had demonstrated that someone was finally willing to fight back. The trap had worked, but it was only the beginning. Chief Warrant Officer Greg Palmer led his Marine team through the captured raider vessel, methodically searching every compartment. What they found made his stomach turn. Storage lockers filled with personal items from dozens of different ships. Children's toys, wedding rings, family photos. The raiders had been keeping trophies from their victims like hunters displaying kills. But it was the ship's cargo manifest that truly shocked them. Passenger logs, identification documents, ship registries, all carefully organized, all cross-referenced with attack dates and locations. This was not the work of random pirates. This was a systematic operation, documented and planned with military precision. Lieutenant Sophie Grant arrived from Earth headquarters aboard a fast courier ship, recalled specifically to serve as translator and cultural liaison. The raiders came from multiple species, and interviewing them required someone who understood the subtle differences in how various aliens communicated. Sophie had spent years at the Council learning those differences. Now she would use that knowledge to uncover the truth. The raider captain was a Vexorian named Kreth, a species known for their predatory nature and aggressive territoriality. Sophie sat across from him in the interrogation room, watching his body language carefully. Vexorians were difficult to read, their facial expressions foreign to human understanding, but she had learned Kreth showed no remorse. Through Sophie's careful translation, a horrifying picture emerged. The raiders were not independent criminals. They were contractors, hired by legitimate governments to destabilize trade routes and eliminate economic competition. The attack served a dual purpose: stealing valuable cargo while creating chaos that benefited certain council members politically. Commander Tyler Hayes arrived aboard his intelligence vessel Shadowpoint, taking personal command of the investigation. Tyler had seen corruption before, had dealt with conspiracy and political manipulation during Earth's corporate wars. But even his cynical worldview was shocked by the depth of what they uncovered. The financial records were damning. Payments from shell corporations that traced back to mid-tier galactic powers. Communication logs showing coordination with officials who held positions in council security. Even targeting recommendations, suggesting which ships to attack based on which species the conspirators wanted to pressure politically. Tyler worked through the night, connecting data points and building a case that would hold up under scrutiny. The evidence showed a pattern stretching back years. The Council's persistent failure to stop the attacks was not incompetence. It was deliberate. Some members were actively profiting from the violence while others looked away to maintain political alliances. Admiral Kate Sullivan received Tyler's preliminary report and immediately understood the implications. If humanity presented this evidence to the Galactic Council, the fragile alliance that maintained peace between hundreds of species could collapse. Wars might erupt across multiple sectors. The economic disruption alone could destabilize entire regions of space, but staying silent meant allowing the attacks to continue. It meant more innocent people dying while their own governments funded the killers. It meant accepting that the civilized galaxy was built on a foundation of hidden violence and calculated murder. Jake Morrison argued for immediate action during a secured video conference with the Admiral. He spoke bluntly, the way humans did when lives were at stake. Earth had not clawed its way to the stars by waiting for permission to do the right thing. They had evidence of crimes. They had prisoners. They needed to act. Sophie Grant disagreed, her time at the Council making her more cautious about political fallout. Humanity's reputation in galactic society was already shaky. The other species called them violent deathworlders, barely civilized primitives who solved problems with force. Unilateral action could isolate Earth precisely when they needed allies most. Lisa Price supported Jake's position but urged careful planning. Whatever they did needed to be decisive. Half measures would only make things worse. If humanity was going to challenge the Council's authority, they needed to be prepared for the consequences. The debate continued for hours, officers weighing military necessity against political reality. Admiral Sullivan listened to all perspectives, her experience telling her that both sides were right. Action was necessary, but action without strategy was suicide. The decision crystallized when another distress call arrived. A medical transport carrying Threxian children, injured in an industrial accident on a frontier colony. The ship was racing toward an orbital hospital, its young patients in critical condition. Time was measured in hours. Without immediate treatment, children would die. Tyler Hayes pulled up the Raiders' targeting database and felt ice in his chest. The medical transport was on the list. It was scheduled to be attacked within the next 6 hours. Someone had decided that killing injured children was an acceptable price for their political games. Admiral Sullivan made her decision. The time for debate was over. The Earth Defense Fleet would not request Council authorization. They would not file diplomatic protests. They would not wait for committees to debate while children died. Humanity would respond to every distress call in the sector with overwhelming force. Any vessel threatening civilian traffic would be disabled or destroyed, immediately and without warning. Jake Morrison's task force, now reinforced with additional ships from Earth, took up patrol positions throughout the sector. Lisa Price upgraded their sensor network to cover 3 times the previous area. Danny Ford's destroyer group began continuous sweeps, hunting for any sign of raider activity. Sophie Grant drafted the message that would go out on all frequencies, in every major galactic language. She kept it simple, stripped of diplomatic language and political nuance. Just a statement of fact delivered in calm, precise words that left no room for misinterpretation. The message broadcast across the sector. Every ship, every station, every outpost received it. Lieutenant Sophie Grant's voice, representing Earth, spoke with quiet certainty. This sector was now under the protection of the Earth Defense Fleet. Any act of piracy or aggression against civilian vessels would be met with immediate military response. No warnings. No negotiations. This was the only message they would receive. The galaxy held its breath. Some council members lodged immediate protests about humanity's unilateral action. They cited regulations, treaties, protocols. They demanded Earth withdraw and submit to proper authority. Their messages went unanswered. Humanity was done asking permission. Other council members remained conspicuously silent. They did not protest. They did not support. They simply watched, waiting to see how the situation developed. Tyler Hayes noted which species stayed quiet. Those were the ones with something to hide. In the shadows of galactic politics, the puppet masters who had funded the raiders began emergency calculations. Some argued for cutting their losses, for abandoning the operation before the trail led back to them. Others wanted to escalate, to teach the upstart Deathworlders a lesson about interfering in matters beyond their understanding. They made a critical mistake. They underestimated how far humanity was willing to go. They assumed Earth's threat was a bluff, that humans would back down when faced with superior numbers. They forgot that humans came from a world where survival meant fighting even when victory seemed impossible. The conspirators assembled a response fleet. Not raiders this time, but actual military vessels. Warships with advanced weapons and experienced crews. They would crush the human task force, demonstrate the price of defiance, and restore the old order where certain species knew their place. Jake Morrison received the intelligence about the approaching fleet from Tyler Hayes. The numbers were not good. The enemy had more ships, heavier weapons, better shields. In a straight fight, the human task force would be outgunned significantly. Lisa ran probability simulations, and the results were grim. Less than 30% chance of victory in direct engagement, but Danny Ford smiled when he saw the enemy fleet composition. Big ships, powerful but slow, built for conventional warfare, for formations and coordinated fire, not built for the kind of fighting that humanity had perfected through centuries of brutal conflict on Earth. Not ready for how Deathworlders made war. Ryan Clark began planning the defensive position, looking for terrain that would favor smaller, more maneuverable vessels. He found it in a debris field, the remnants of an ancient stellar collision. Asteroids and destroyed ships created a 3-dimensional maze where size became a disadvantage. The Earth Defense Fleet withdrew to the debris field and waited. The medical transport with its injured children reached the hospital safely, escorted by 2 human destroyers that peeled off from the main force. Mission accomplished. Now came the hard part, making sure everyone understood that protecting the innocent was not a one-time gesture. It was policy, and humanity would defend that policy with blood if necessary. The enemy fleet approached, confident and ready to teach Earth a lesson. They expected to find scattered human ships perhaps already fleeing. Instead, they found silence and a debris field that would become a graveyard. The galaxy was about to witness what happened when someone mistook human restraint for human weakness. The enemy fleet arrived with 15 warships, their formation perfect and their weapons charged. They were professionals, military crews from species that had been spacefaring for thousands of years, while humans were still learning to make fire. Their commander broadcast a demand for surrender, confident that the primitive Deathworlders would recognize superior force. Jake Morrison stood on the Valiant's bridge, watching the enemy formation on his tactical display. Lisa Price had already identified their flagship, a massive cruiser that dwarfed any human vessel. The enemy commander expected conventional warfare. Ships arranged in neat lines exchanging fire until one side broke. That was how civilized species fought. Humans were not civilized, not in the way the galaxy defined it. Commander Ryan Clark positioned his cruiser steadfast behind a cluster of asteroids, his weapons officers waiting for the order to fire. Danny Ford's destroyer group scattered throughout the debris field, each ship finding cover among the wreckage. Amy Ross brought the Iron Duke to a position near an ancient derelict, her civilian freighter bristling with weapons that no proper merchant vessel should carry. The enemy fleet entered the debris field cautiously, their large ships struggling to navigate the tight spaces between asteroids. Their sensors showed human ships ahead, but could not get clear targeting locks. The debris created too much interference, too many false readings. They pressed forward, determined to flush out the humans and end this challenge to galactic order. Lisa Price fired the first shot. A railgun barrage from the Valiant, solid metal moving at incredible speed. The rounds punched through the flagship's shields before they could adapt. Energy shields were designed to stop energy weapons, to diffuse heat and disperse particle beams. They were not built to stop physical projectiles with that much kinetic energy. The flagship's hull ruptured, atmosphere venting from 3 separate breaches. Damage alarms screamed across their bridge. The enemy commander stared in shock at weapons that should not have worked, at technology that was supposedly primitive. The battle began not with an exchange of fire, but with a statement. Humanity fought differently. The enemy fleet attempted to return fire, their weapons lancing through space toward the Valiant's last position. But Jake had already moved, his ship diving behind a massive asteroid. Human vessels were smaller, built to operate in Earth's crushing gravity well. What made them cramped and uncomfortable also made them agile. They twisted and turned through spaces the enemy's larger ships could not follow. Danny Ford's destroyers struck like wolves, appearing from behind cover to fire and then disappearing again. They used the asteroids like hunters use terrain, taking advantage of every piece of cover. The enemy tried to target them, but their weapons were designed for ship-to-ship combat in open space, not this 3-dimensional maze of rock and wreckage. The raiders who had contracted with these military forces had promised them easy targets, frightened deathworlders who would scatter when faced with real military power. Instead, the enemy found themselves ambushed, harassed, unable to bring their superior numbers to bear effectively. Commander Tyler Hayes monitored the battle from his intelligence ship positioned outside the debris field. He tracked the enemy communications, listening to their confusion and growing panic. They were calling for reinforcements, reporting that the humans were fighting like nothing they had encountered before. Asymmetric warfare, the enemy called it. On Earth, they had simpler terms: guerrilla tactics, resistance fighting. The warfare of smaller forces who learned to make every enemy victory cost more than it was worth. The enemy flagship attempted to withdraw, to pull back and regroup. Ryan Clark's Steadfast emerged from cover directly in their path. The human cruiser was a fraction of the flagship's size, should have been ignored as a minor threat. But the Steadfast's weapons focused on a single point of the flagship's damaged hull, punching through weakened armor and striking deep into the ship's interior. The enemy commander made a critical decision. He ordered 3 of his warships to pursue the medical transport that human destroyers had escorted to safety earlier. If he could not defeat the human military, he would force them to surrender by threatening civilians. It was logical, tactical, the kind of calculated ruthlessness that civilized warfare sometimes required. Sophie Grant, serving as communications officer aboard the Valiant, intercepted the enemy transmission. She immediately relayed the targeting data to Jake Morrison. The enemy was moving to kill injured children, using them as hostages to force a surrender. Jake did not hesitate. The Valiant broke cover and positioned itself between the enemy ships and the vector toward the medical transport. The flagship and 2 supporting vessels immediately focused all fire on the Valiant. Energy beams and missiles converged on the human ship from 3 directions at once. The Valiant's shields held, barely. Designed to survive Earth's radiation belts and deflect micrometeorites at orbital speeds, they were overbuilt by galactic standards. But 3 warships concentrating fire was more than they were meant to handle. Hull plating began to melt. Interior bulkheads buckled from the heat. Damage control teams rushed to seal breaches and reroute systems, but Jake's maneuver gave Danny Ford the opening he needed. The Hammer and her sister destroyers concentrated fire on the enemy flagship's engines. Without shields to protect them from kinetic weapons, the engine cluster was vulnerable. Railgun rounds tore through the propulsion systems, crippling the massive vessel and leaving it drifting. The enemy fleet broke formation. Panic spread through their ranks as they realized the Deathworlders would not be intimidated, would not surrender to save their own ships, would literally position themselves between weapons fire and the innocent, taking damage meant for others. Admiral Sullivan, monitoring from fleet headquarters, committed the reserves. Fresh human warships emerged from hyperspace behind the enemy position. It was a calculated gamble that left Earth's home defense lighter, but it sent an unmistakable message. This was not just a task force. This was the full attention of humanity's military might. The enemy found themselves surrounded, trapped in the same debris field they had entered so confidently. Some vessels surrendered immediately, their crews shocked at how quickly the situation had reversed. Others attempted to flee, only to find human destroyers blocking every exit vector. Tyler Hayes had been tracking the raid coordinators' encrypted communications throughout the battle. He knew their doctrine, their fallback positions, their emergency protocols. Every piece of intelligence Earth had gathered about the conspiracy was now being used against them. Humanity had come prepared not just for battle, but for war. The engagement lasted 3 hours. By its end, the enemy fleet was destroyed or captured. Human losses were significant. 3 ships heavily damaged, 1 destroyer lost with all hands, 147 personnel dead. Their names would be added to the memorial walls, young men and women who died protecting strangers from species that had once looked down on humanity as primitive. But the medical transport reached the hospital safely. The injured Threxian children received treatment. They would live. 42 kids who would grow up, have families of their own, never knowing the names of the humans who had died to protect them. Jake Morrison stood on the Valiant's damaged bridge looking at the battle damage and the casualty reports. Around him, his crew worked to repair systems and care for the wounded. They were exhausted, hurt, and traumatized. But they had done what needed to be done. Sophie Grant drafted the message to the Galactic Council. Jake reviewed it and removed most of the diplomatic language. They were past the point of politeness. The final message was brief, delivered in Sophie's calm voice that somehow made it more threatening than any shouted declaration. Earth had responded to a distress call. Earth would continue to respond to every distress call. The Council could adjust their policies accordingly, or learn to stay out of the way. The age of unanswered pleas for help was over. Someone in the galaxy was finally willing to fight for the innocent. That someone was humanity. Across the sector, every species with the technology to monitor military engagements had witnessed the battle. They watched human ships take damage meant for civilians. They saw Deathworlder tactics turn superior numbers into a liability. They observed what happened when someone threatened those under humanity's protection. The message was clear, loud, written in weapons fire and sacrifice. Humanity had arrived in galactic society with hope and optimism, wanting to be accepted among the civilized species. That humanity was gone. In its place stood something the galaxy had never encountered before. A species that fought not for conquest or resources or political advantage. A species that fought because they could not stand by while others suffered. The galaxy had called them violent deathworlders. Now the galaxy would learn what that truly meant. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session within 48 hours of the battle. For the first time in decades, the chamber was full. Every species sent representatives. Everyone wanted to understand what had happened and what it meant for the future. Lieutenant Sophie Grant stood before the council. No longer a junior liaison requesting permission, but a representative of Earth's position. She presented Commander Tyler Hayes' evidence methodically. Financial records showing payments to the raiders. Communication intercepts proving coordination with legitimate governments. Testimony from captured prisoners detailing the conspiracy. Some council members erupted in outrage. They accused humanity of fabricating evidence, of using violence to justify their aggression, of violating every protocol that maintained galactic peace. Their protests rang hollow when Sophie played actual recordings of council officials coordinating attacks, when she displayed financial transactions that traced directly to their governments, when captured raiders identified them by name. Other representatives remained silent, their body language showing the careful neutrality of those who knew they were guilty but had not yet been directly implicated. They waited to see which way the political winds would blow before committing to a position. A few species quietly thanked Sophie in the corridors after the session. Their people had been targets of the conspiracy, their trade routes disrupted, their merchants killed. They had suspected council corruption but lacked proof. Now they had it. Delivered by the violent deathworlders everyone had dismissed as primitive. Admiral Kate Sullivan watched the council proceedings via video link and understood what was happening. The council's authority was crumbling. For centuries it had maintained peace through consensus and diplomacy. But that peace had been built on a lie. Some members had been waging shadow wars while others looked away. The illusion was shattered. Sullivan moved quickly to fill the power vacuum. Human-led peacekeeping initiatives were announced before the council could organize a response. Captain Jake Morrison's task force became the core of a new rapid response fleet, authorized to answer distress calls without waiting for bureaucratic approval. Other species began requesting human escorts for their vulnerable vessels. Willing to pay for protection they could not provide themselves. Commander Lisa Price established training programs where human tactical officers taught other species' militaries how to actually fight. It was uncomfortable for many. Civilizations that had evolved on gentle worlds struggled with humanity's casual relationship with violence. They flinched at combat drills that humans considered basic. They questioned tactics that seemed needlessly aggressive, but the results were undeniable. Protected convoys stopped disappearing. Pirates and raiders learned that attacking ships with human-trained security meant facing opponents who would fight back effectively. Merchants who completed Earth's security training suddenly found their insurance premiums dropping and their cargo arriving intact. Lieutenant Danny Ford led a hunting group that systematically dismantled the remaining raider networks. It was ugly work, tracking criminal enterprises across multiple star systems and through shell corporations designed to hide their operations. Danny approached it with grim determination, the same mindset that had allowed humanity to eliminate piracy from Earth's oceans. Find them, capture them, dismantle their organizations, and make sure everyone understood that raiding was no longer profitable. The galaxy learned that humans did not just win battles, they finished wars. They did not declare victory and go home while the enemy regrouped. They pursued, they hunted, they eliminated threats completely. It was a level of commitment to security that other species found excessive, until they realized their ships were finally safe. The political landscape shifted dramatically. Species that had once dismissed humanity as violent primitives now sought Earth's military alliances. Trade agreements suddenly favored human merchant vessels. The concept of a deathworlder guarantee, a human promise to protect cargo or passengers, became valuable in interstellar commerce. Ships advertised human security teams like luxury features. Captain Amy Ross and other civilian merchants formed a trading consortium that operated with discreet military backing. They established profitable routes through previously dangerous sectors, their armed freighters serving as both economic vessels and peacekeeping deterrents. The line between Earth's commercial and military presence blurred deliberately. Every human ship became a potential first responder to distress calls. Commander Ryan Clark worked with species willing to reform their military forces, though reform was a generous term. In reality, he was building new forces from the ground up using human doctrine. The Council's traditional approach of observation and negotiation was supplemented and gradually replaced by human-designed patrol vessels crewed by species who understood that sometimes civilization required defenders willing to use force. Tyler Hayes expanded Earth's intelligence network throughout the sector and beyond. Humanity's survival instinct extended to information gathering. They had learned millennia ago that knowing your enemy prevented surprises, that intelligence was as important as firepower. The galaxy found itself becoming transparent to human surveillance, though Hayes ensured the intelligence served collective security rather than Earth's exclusive interests. Mostly, Admiral Sullivan addressed Earth's government about the costs and benefits of their new role. The rescue of one medical transport had transformed humanity into the sector's de facto protectors. It was a responsibility that would drain resources, cost lives, and create enemies among those who had profited from the old disorder. But it was also leverage. Political power bought not with economic strength or technological superiority, but with the simple willingness to fight when others would not. Earth now sat at the center of a growing alliance of species who valued security over politics, who wanted trade routes protected more than they wanted diplomatic niceties, who understood that sometimes survival required unpleasant choices. Sophie Grant returned to the Galactic Council as Earth's official ambassador, though her role had fundamentally changed. She was no longer petitioning for humanity's acceptance among civilized species. She was explaining humanity's decisions to a council that now had to adapt to Earth's presence rather than the reverse. The council's power continued to erode as more species signed mutual defense agreements with Earth. They called it the Deathworlder Alliance informally, though the official name was more diplomatic. The core principle was simple. Member species would train their security forces using human methods, would share intelligence about threats, and would respond to each other's distress calls with actual military force. Some council members warned about the dangers of militarization, about humanity corrupting the galaxy's peaceful nature. Their warnings were ignored by species tired of watching their people die while the council debated. The civilized approach had failed to prevent systematic predation. The Deathworlder approach at least kept ships safe.